This is Joseph and welcome to my podcast, Ineskwela. Sa podcast na ito, you will hear me talking about anything that grabs my attention na may kinalaman sa mga Kristiyanong Pinoy ngayon and the broader culture that they inhabit. Tara, maguntahan tayo. Welcome to Ineskwela. Para sa episode na ito, ang gusto kong paghuntahan natin ngayon ay itong fairly recent social phenomenon kung saan nakikita natin yung mga tao whenever there are perspectives or point of views that they find unpalatable to their tastes and they think are actually driven by prejudice, they put a label on it with a suffix phobia. So nasabi ko na I think this is a fairly recent social phenomenon kasi dito sa Pilipinas lalo na kasi naalala ko nung kabataan ko, ginagamit naman yung salitang phobia pero it is just to describe an intense and irrational fear. So for example, isa kang tao na takot sa gagamba and your fear of spiders is something that paralyzes you. So meron kang arachnophobia. May mga tao na takot sila sa tight spaces at kapag nasa tight spaces sila, iniisip nila may mangyaring masama sa kanila, halos masuffocate sila. So meron silang claustrophobia. So ibig sabihin yung phobia is something that describes a psychological condition. Although fear is a fairly normal human emotion, pero pag sinabing meron kang phobia, it doesn't suggest psychological health at all. It is something that you have as a mental disorder. You are not psychologically healthy. Pero ngayon, itong suffix ng phobia ay nagkaroon ng evolution ng meaning and social function, not entirely removed doon sa fear idea, pero mas ine-emphasize yung psychological prejudice. But still, gets with that effects that describes a person as having some kind of a condition. Dinidescribe yung mga certain perspectives and point of views and beliefs as phobic in some sense. So for example, isa kang tao na humahawak sa paniniwala na ang sex or gender categories are binary, dalawa lang, lalaki at babae, and you don't make a separation with or a radical disconnect between sex and gender, so you risk being called transphobic or homophobic. O kung ikaw naman ay isang tao na mag-offer ng cultural criticism against Islam and you are risking yourself to be accused of prejudice against Muslim people, meron kang Islamophobia. Sa West, lalong-lalo na sa Amerika, usong-uso yung tinatawag na xenophobia, at ito naman ay ginagamit in order to describe those who hold to the policy of keeping national borders intact and keeping out illegal immigrants doon sa borders ng United States. So you have a prejudice against foreigners, ang tawag doon ay xenophobia. So magandang maintindihan ito kasi ngayon June na nga, Pride Month na. And when we offer, as Christians, when we offer our views on homosexuality and transgenderism, it is almost certain that we are exposing ourselves to be labeled as homophobic and transphobic. Gusto kong i-discuss for this episode yung mga bagay na yan. Ano kayang ideological foundations na pinaggagalingan ng practice na ito ng phobia calling sa mga tao? Now, just to provoke some thought, isipin nyo bakit kaya walang Christianophobia? It is an interesting question because it is a fact that Christian communities all over the world are still the subjects of some of the fiercest persecutions today. And yet we hear almost nobody calling out people for Christianophobia when they offer out their criticisms and opposition to Christian faith and beliefs. Now, ito yung suggested answer ko dyan. The reason why there is no Christianophobia is because this whole phobia calling thing is drawing from the ideological foundations that are neo-Marxist, meaning yung mga repackaging ng Marxism sa ating panahon, whether in its deconstructionist, postmodernist front or yung galing sa new leftism na tinatawag. Yung mga neo-Marxist views na yan, it finds its common enemy in Christian capitalist societies. Ang view kasi nila in a broad sketch is that Judeo-Christian ethics, which is what informs Western culture, especially in its traditional sexual moral codes, is actually but a tool in order to support a structure of society that privilege some people and marginalize and oppress some group identities. So that is neo-Marxism for you. So paano ko nasabi na neo-Marxist ang foundation ng phobia calling thing na ito? That is what I hope to unpack in the remaining time of this episode. To begin with, I will introduce you to some of the basic thoughts of the influential French philosopher na si Michel Foucault. Maganda na makilala natin si Michel Foucault because he is one of the key philosophers in order to understand our postmodern age and its thinking. Now, maraming sinulat si Michel Foucault tungkol sa deconstruction ng society and its institutions in order to demonstrate, in order to reveal that these institutions that we have in our societies are actually institutions that can be understood and in fact are best understood in terms of the power relation that is going on. Ibig sabihin, yung mga social institutions natin ay palaging merong people in power, and then those people in power are keeping those under their power subjugated. At isa sa mga pinaglapatan niya ng ganyang klase ng deconstruction is our language itself. So sa atin, ang basic conceptualization natin pagka sinabing language is that language is what facilitates a discourse in order for us to be able to refer to those external things by the representation of words. So for example, sinabi ko yung salitang tree or puno, I can assume that you understand what I am referring to because there is an objective referent at ang tinutukoy doon ay yung puno as an object with its trunk and stem and leaves and whatever. Pero yung insight ni Foucault tungkol dito kapag gumagamit tayo ng isang salita, we cannot really remove it from its social context. In fact, the meaning of a word is tied and inseparable from its social context. So halimbawa, balikan natin yung sinabi kong tree or puno. When we say tree, we are not really referring to the essence of the tree in its noumenon, meaning tree in itself. We are referring to it in its placement in our cultural, social, political, economic contexts. And outside of that, there is no meaning in the word tree. And because our social structures, our political, social, and economic contexts always have repressive power that marginalize and keep other people oppressed, other identities oppressed, therefore our language is a language that is really a vehicle of injustice, a vehicle of oppression, a vehicle of repressive power. And therefore, those people who use their language cannot help but be shaped into a kind of thinking that is repressive and oppressive and marginalizing of whatever structure of oppression our language support. So siguro nagiging obvious na sa inyo yung connection nito doon sa phobia calling. Ibig sabihin, it is a condition. You had been conditioned into marginalizing and oppressing certain group identities just by the language that you use. So, tignan natin yung application nito sa ating panahon. So nakikita nyo na merong malaking gender debate that has been going on in the West, and I'm sure ilang panahon na lang papasok na ito sa Pilipinas. Sa English language kasi merong gender pronouns, traditional gender pronouns na he and she, which is pronouns that are binary categories. The he represents the male, and then the she represents the female counterpart. So the idea is this language is repressive. This language is there in order to marginalize certain group identities that doesn't conform to binary gender categories. Imagine that. It is not because the explanation is not because there are only two genders, there are only two sexes that can be objectively referenced to. Hindi dahil merong objective reference by sociological, statistical, biological, physiological, and religious means na-ascertain natin that sex and gender are existing in mostly binary categories. No. Kaya merong he and she lang is because our language is a vehicle of oppression, and it is oppressing those marginalized group identities na hindi nagko-conform sa male and female. So this is where it gets interesting kasi sa idea ni Foucault, yung power doesn't only have a function of repression, it also can have a function of normalization. So yun yung tinatawag niya na normalizing power. So ang normalizing power is that power that we can use, and in fact we should use, in order to better our societies, in order to create something that is more moral, that is more equitable. But this would require some kind of revolution. Probably not revolution in the sense of taking up arms, but revolution in the sense of applying some social engineering by using coercive tools. Meaning, language must be retooled for revolution. Diyan papasok yung makikita ninyong obsession ng New Left with policing our language. So there is an application of social judgment and pressure to get people into using pronouns. For example, mga pronouns na hindi binary lang yung categories, and then in some other cases, in the more extreme cases, umaabot pa sa legislation, ile-legislate yung paggamit ng mga gender pronouns that people prefer for themselves because they do not fit in with a he or she binary categories. And makikita din natin yan sa Pilipinas just recently when an online dictionary decided to prescribe a new gender-neutral word in order to refer to Filipinos. At yun ay instead of just Pinoy at Pinay, merong I'm not sure if this is the proper way to pronounce it, Pinexi or Pinxi or Pilipinex. And this, I believe, is terrible because language doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to the whole group of people who are using the language. Hindi ito pagmamay-ari ng some elite group who can prescribe what people ought to use. Kaya ang dictionary, hindi siya dapat prescriptive kung hindi descriptive. It must describe what the people are now using, words that the people are now familiar with and using in their conversations. Pero yung ginawa ng mga ganitong klase ng prescription, they are taking the lead in order to impose on people what language they should use and what words ought to mean. And this reminds me of George Orwell's 1984, kung saan yung state of Oceania, sinisigurado nila that they are regularly revising their dictionary in order to control what people are saying, what language the people are using, and by that means they can control what people are thinking. Now, base sa lahat ng mga sinabi ko na ito tungkol kay Foucault, diyan ngayon lumalabas yung pagtawag ng phobia. Kasi sa pagtawag ng phobia, na ikaw ay merong homophobia or transphobia or Islamophobia or whatever phobia na idaragdag pa nila sa listahan, they have invalidated your view by showing that it is actually your condition. You have a condition. You are not psychologically healthy. Your mind has been perverted in order to support structures of oppression. Therefore, you are not worth listening to. You are judged even before you are known and heard. At dyan papasok ngayon yung mga cancel culture. Because you have a condition, when you speak about your view, you are just propagating and promoting the perversion of other people's mind. And if the revolution is going to be successful, the revolution to change people's thinking, to liberate their minds from the conditioning that makes them oppressors, then censorship is necessary. And the best way to do that censorship is also by way of that phobia calling. You are homophobic, you are transphobic, you are someone not to be taken seriously because you are not psychologically healthy. It is already removing the possibility of nuanced and complex conversation to begin with. Kapag ka sinabi ko na naniniwala ako na meron lang dalawang gender identities and yung gender identities ng mga tao ay hindi separate sa kanilang biological sex at naniniwala ako dito based on religious ground, biological, statistical, scientific, sociological, etc. Well, stop right there because you are homophobic. And that's all that I need to know. So what is at stake really is tolerance of other people's views and perspective, and freedom of speech, and freedom in education or free thinking. And that has been the aim. And I'm not making this up. Listen to Herbert Marcuse. And I will read from him. Si Herbert Marcuse ay isa doon sa mga thinkers ng Frankfurt School. Ito yung mga group of intellectuals who gathered together having been disappointed and disillusioned by Marxism with all the catastrophes that this idea has led into. So they go back to the drawing board at inisip nila kung kung paano i-represent ulit yung Marxism by repackaging it into something. And it was in Frankfurt School that the ideas of Marx, where there are two classes in society, those who are oppressed and those who are oppressors, these ideas of Marx had been wedded together with the ideas of Sigmund Freud, with the sexualization of human identity. And that explains the ideas of our present times. Ito yung sinabi ni Herbert Marcuse sa kanyang sinulat na Repressive Tolerance, and I will read. When tolerance mainly serves the protection and preservation of a repressive society, when it serves to neutralize opposition and to render men immune against other and better forms of life, then tolerance has been perverted. And when this perversion starts in the mind of the individual, in his consciousness, his needs, when heteronomous interests occupy him before he can experience his servitude, then the efforts to counteract his dehumanization must begin at the place of entrance, there where the false consciousness takes form, or rather is systematically formed. It must begin with stopping the words and images which feed this consciousness. To be sure, this is censorship, even pre-censorship, but openly directed against the more or less hidden censorship that permeates the free media. So imagine what Marcuse is saying. He was saying that because we are being conditioned, perverted in facts, and dehumanized by our society, and by that is meant, at least primarily, Judeo-Christian ethics and its sexual moral codes. Therefore, censorship is necessary. This must be removed from the universities. This must not be given public platforms. There's a pandemic of phobia among people, homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, xenophobia, etc. And the new leftists, the progressivists, the postmodernists of the Foucault type, they are the liberators of our age. And how are they doing that? By setting up a structure of repression, of oppression, with victims, particularly those who hold to traditional Christian values. So yan ang ating panahon. And these people are speaking. Foucault is speaking. The Frankfurt School is speaking. Whenever people utter those words, homophobic, transphobic, Islamophobic. But friends, I appeal to you who are listening, we can frame our discussions better. We can treat all people with due respect, ano man yung kanilang perspective, ano man yung mga differences of views na meron tayo sa kanila. We can treat them as people worthy to be listened to, as people who perhaps we can learn a thing or two. So I'm calling for doing away with this whole phobia calling thing. This is Joseph Mangahas in Eskwela.